Disciple Life Journal, and we're reading in Matthew, and we'll be reading during the week. Our daily devotions will be Matthew 21 through 25. So we'll be taking our Bible study tonight from Matthew 21. I'm Dave Ketchen, and we're glad that you're here tonight. I'm Associate Pastor at Old Zion Hill Baptist Church. Glad that you've chosen to join us. If you're part of our D-Life group, and welcome. If you're tuning in and not part of the group, you can join at any time, and we'll have some information a little bit later on that if you want to get a D-Life journal and join the D-Life virtual group, you'll be able to do that. So we're reading in Matthew chapter 21, and we're reading one chapter a day all the way through for the week through Matthew 25. It begins with the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem, and it concludes with Jesus leaving the temple for the very last time to go it's 2 days before the Passover, and he begins to prepare for his eventual arrest and crucifixion. So it's this week before Passover where Jesus enters the temple, the triumphal entry, and there's a series of stories. It's really fortunate that you're reading the chronology of the week over a fairly short period of time, because as you read all that takes place and the parables that he tells and the confrontations with the religious establishment that he has, you can begin to feel the drama building. You begin to feel that this week is the pulling no punches, in your face confrontation between Jesus and the religious leaders. And Jesus pulls no punches, and they're pulling no punches, and it's a very dramatic series of chapters in the Gospels. And so we're going to be looking at one of those this evening. I've entitled tonight's lesson, The Picture of the Stone. And we're going to be looking at how Jesus describes himself in one of those confrontations. And so we're going to be reading Matthew 21 verses 42 to 44. Before we turn there and begin to read, let me give you the storyline up to that point. Jesus is being confronted by the religious leaders, the teachers of the law, and the Pharisees. They're asking him by what authority he does what he does, and Jesus is answering them with a challenge, and then he talks about we get into what is called the parable of the talent, or the tenant, the parable of the tenant in chapter 21, and it talks about the landowner, the vineyard owner, having a vineyard that he's fully equipped to be productive. He rents the vineyard out to tenants, and they're to tend the crops and tend the land, and he sends his messengers back to get the profits and take care of the financial affairs of the land. And the tenants stone and kill the prophets, and stone and kill the messengers, and then finally the landowner sends his own son, saying, surely they will respect my son. And they kill the son. Then he asks the religious leaders, what do you think the landowner is going to do? And they replied, those wretches ought to be destroyed. The landowner will come himself, and he will destroy and take away those wretched landowners for the things that they've done. That's the story behind what we're going to be looking at. So Jesus then looks at the Pharisees, and he says to them, and we begin reading in Matthew 21 verses 42. This is his response to what the Pharisees have just said about they think that the landowner ought to destroy and to punish severely the tenants of the land for what they've done to his messengers and what they did to his son by killing his son. So let's turn to Matthew 21 verses 42 to 44. Then Jesus said to them, have you never read the Scriptures? The stone the builders rejected have become the capstone. The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore I tell you that the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people who will produce its fruit. He who falls on the stone will be broken to pieces, but he on whom the stone falls will be crushed. That was Jesus' response to these guys. So here we have a metaphor being put forth, the metaphor of a stone. Now, we're very familiar with the first part of that, but there's actually two pictures of stones here, or a stone here, and they are deeply seated and deeply based in the Old Testament scriptures. Any Jew, especially these guys, okay, especially these teachers of the law and the Pharisees, were going to understand very completely, very clearly, that because they were very familiar with the scriptures that Jesus was referring to. The last part of chapter 21, we didn't read that, but if you go back to that, it says the Pharisees knew that Jesus was talking about them. And they began to plot to kill him, but they weren't about to do it openly where the people were, because they were afraid of the people. Because the people considered Jesus a prophet. Many of the people had begun to consider Jesus to be the Messiah. And so this picture of the stone is very important. So there's actually two pictures that are here that we're going to be looking at. We're very familiar with the first one. And the first one deals with, Jesus actually quoted Psalm 118:22. The first picture of the stone is that it is a stone which the builders rejected, but has become the most important stone in the building. Now, we're pretty familiar with this one. We hear messages about this one all the time. And it is actually from a messianic psalm, Psalm 118:22. And that psalm says, the stone the builders rejected has become the capstone. Jesus actually quotes Psalm 118:22. So these Pharisees and teachers of the law, they knew full well what Psalm 118:22 said. And they knew, and they understand full well that Jesus was referring to himself as being that stone. And so that just infuriated him. But there's another prophecy in Isaiah that even takes Psalm 118 a little bit further and even makes it more specific about this particular picture of the stone. It is a stone that has been laid in Zion and been laid in Israel, and the builders rejected. But look at what Isaiah 28:16 says. Behold, I am laying in Zion for a foundation a stone, a tested stone, a precious cornerstone, a sure foundation. Isaiah 28 is a companion piece to Psalm 118. God has prophesied twice that he is going to lay a foundation, that there's going to be and he uses the term stone to do it. So the first picture of the stone is that a stone which the builders are going to reject, but because that stone is rejected, that stone is still used to become the chief cornerstone. And so it is very, very important. And the Pharisees and the teachers of the law understood that Jesus was referring to the stone as himself, and that he was referring to them as the builders, and that they were rejecting that stone. Then we have the second picture of the stone. Now, the second picture of the stone has two aspects. It has two references to it, and it is in the last verse that, or the last part of what Jesus said to the Pharisees when he said, when he quoted in verse 44, "He who falls on the stone will be broken to pieces, but on him on whom the stone falls will be crushed." Now he said that immediately after he said that the kingdom is going to be taken away from you guys and going to be given to somebody else who will produce fruit. All right, and so they knew what he meant by that. And then he went on to say that the kingdom of God will be the stone, not the kingdom. The kingdom is going to be taken away from you, but the stone, he who falls or stumbles on the stone will be broken, and when the stone falls on him, he'll be crushed. Now, what does that mean? We also have Old Testament prophecies that go on to give more explanation of what the stone is. Okay, now the second picture of the stone has two parts to it. The first part of it is that there's a stone which breaks one who falls against it. All right, so this stone, Jesus said, that those who fall against the stone or stumbles over the stone will be broken. So the second picture of the stone deals with someone who will break who falls against it. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about a prophecy in Isaiah chapter 8 verses 13 through 15. The amazing thing is that this particular prophecy is extremely specific. In fact, it is so specific it's kind of spooky as to what's happening at that particular point in time. Because Jesus is saying, now you guys are stumbling against me. You guys are falling and falling over me being the Messiah. And so listen to what Isaiah 8, 13 through 15 says. This is the second picture of the stone, and the first part of it is a stone which breaks one who falls against it. Isaiah 8, verses 13 through 15. The Lord Almighty is the one you are to regard as holy. He is the one you are to fear. He is the one you are to dread. Now, he's talking about himself. Okay? The Lord Almighty is the one you are to regard as holy. He is the one you are to fear. He is the one you are to dread. Verse 14. He will be a sanctuary for both houses of Israel, but for both houses of Israel, he will be a stone that causes men to stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. And for the people, listen to this, and for the people of Jerusalem. Where was Jesus saying this stuff? In Jerusalem. But for the people of Jerusalem, he will be a trap and a snare. Many of them will stumble, and they will fall and be broken. They will be snared and captured. Now that's pretty specific. He's talking about this second picture of the stone is that it is a stone that causes people to be broken who stumble over it or who fall against it. And it's extremely specific. He says it will be a stumbling block for both the houses of Israel. So now he's talking about both the old kingdom or talking about the divided Israel. When Israel divided after the death of Solomon, you had the southern kingdom of Judah and the northern kingdom of Israel. The northern kingdom of Israel was taken into captivity some 300 years later first. The southern kingdom followed behind that. So both houses of Israel includes all of Israel. It'll be a stumbling block for both houses of Israel, and Jerusalem is singled out specifically as being the place or a place where there will be a stumbling that's going over and being caused by this stone, Jesus referring to himself. And so it is a stone that breaks one who falls against it. And so the breaking that he was talking about with the Pharisees is that the kingdom is going to be snatched away from you guys and given to somebody else. Their power is going to be broken. Their influence is going to be done away with. But anybody who trips over the message of the gospel, the message of Jesus, who trips over it is going to be broken and falls. They're not going to change the gospel. They're not going to disregard the gospel. They're not going to put the gospel away. They're going to be broken on the truth of the gospel. It's like I'm beating my head against a rock. Okay, I refuse and don't accept Christ, and I want to argue about whether Jesus is who he says he is or not, and all those kind. I don't want to be told that I have to put my faith in Christ, and I'm going to resist that, and I'm going to fight it. Essentially, what I'm doing is I'm beating my head against a stone, because the gospel is not going to change, and I'm going to break myself. Is what it's going to boil down to. That is the picture, the second picture of the stone. A person who stumbles against it is going to be broken. The second part of the second picture of the stone is that not only does a stone which breaks someone who falls against it, it crushes one to powder. I will crush the one who fights against it into powder. Now he's talking about two different things here. It's important that we understand that he's making two different references. And so Daniel, this is a cool one. Daniel chapter 2, 34, 44 through 45. Let me give you the background of this. Okay, in the book of Daniel was one of the prophets. This whole story about this particular stone has to do with the vision of Nebuchadnezzar, given to Nebuchadnezzar, this evil, world-powerful, haughty, pagan king that Daniel was in the service of because he had been taken captive from Israel and taken to Babylon during the captivity. He had a dream, and it really bothered him. He saw, and it's this great statue, and it talks about the head of gold and the chest of bronze, all the way down to the feet of iron and clay. And it was really bothered him about what this thing was, and so he called on Daniel to interpret the dream. So Daniel was interpreting the dream, and and what he was describing were a succession of world empires that were going to take place. And this prophecy has actually been fulfilled. Okay, it was a prophecy of Babylon, then the Medo-Persians, then the Greeks, then the Romans. That was what this statue was showing by the different parts of the statues. And these empires have never been matched. Of any empires in the world have never been matched in history before or since. But the Babylonian Empire would be succeeded by the Medo-Persian Empire, which would be succeeded by the Greek Empire, which would be succeeded by the Roman Empire. And that's what this statue represented. And so, at the same time, in this dream, Nebuchadnezzar said that there was a stone carved out of a mountain, not by human hands, and the stone was cast against the statue, and it beat the statue to dust. And that really bothered him. He wanted to know what was going on. So Daniel is interpreting the dream, and he's saying what the various parts of the statue are. It is your kingdom, Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian kingdom. It will be succeeded by the Medo-Persian kingdom. It will be succeeded by the Greeks, and it will be succeeded by the Romans. And then he talks about this stone. Okay, and Daniel 2, beginning in verse 34. While you were watching, he's telling the king what the king dreamed. Now the king hadn't told him the dream. In fact, the king brought all his advisors in. He was so disturbed by it, he says, tell me my dream. And they said, well, you tell us the dream, and we'll tell you what it means. And Nebuchadnezzar told all of his advisors, what do I need you guys for? If you're so good, you tell me what I dreamed. And they begged off. They said, well, we don't know. He called Daniel in. Daniel says, okay, this is what you dreamed. And he gave him blow by blow the story of his dream. Okay, so Daniel's telling the king what he dreamed, and the king hadn't told him anything. That impressed the king, by the way. So in Daniel chapter 2, beginning in verse 34, while you were watching, a rock was cut out not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. And then it describes that smashing. Then it goes over to verse 44. In the time of those kings, because he's talking about a succession of empires, in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it itself will endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain, not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. Very mysterious rock, stone. But it says that it crushed these kingdoms and set up a kingdom only established by God that would endure. So the second picture of this stone is that those who stumble against it and try to resist it are going to be broken by it. It's like beating your head against a rock. Those who defy this stone and rebel and work against it are going to be crushed to pieces. Now, we don't spend much time in our New Testament churches dealing with that, but that's really what it says. So what can we learn about the picture of the stone? First off, we can learn that the stone is Jesus. The Pharisees knew full well that he was referring to himself, and it really made them mad. It made them blindly mad. 3 lessons. We can accept that the stone is Jesus, and accepting him rescues us from the consequences of our sin, and it provides a firm foundation for life here and in eternity. Accepting the stone. We can refuse or resist the stone. Refusing him results in being broken by sin and stumbling over the forgiveness it offers. We can defy the stone. Defying him results in being crushed by sin and being separated from God for eternity. The lessons of the stone. We like to think God is a God of love and a God of forgiveness and mercy and all those kinds of things, and that's true. My goodness, He's a God of love and mercy and forgiveness and all those things. But He is a God also of justice, and He will judge. The choice is ours. The choice is to accept the stone for who He is and live a life of forgiveness and live a life on a firm foundation for our future in the present and in eternity. Or we can resist it and beat our head against the rock and be broken by it, or we can defy it and be crushed by it. We need to make space for Jesus in our life, and so we're going to spend some time going over our acrostic, SPACE. In light of this lesson, is there a sin to confess, a promise to claim, an attitude to change, a command to obey, or an example to follow? Keep in mind, this is the last week of Jesus' life. He's coming face to face with His opponents and His critics. He's taking them on nose to nose. He is lovingly and continually lovingly explaining to them who He is, but He is pulling no punches on the consequences of rejecting who He is and the blessings of accepting who He is. Have you made space in your life for Him today? Glad that you've joined us tonight. Hope you're continuing to reading. I really encourage you to read all the chapters this week and watch the chronology take place. Most of the time we don't read the Passion this way, so it'll bless you. We're glad that you've been with us tonight. There'll be if you want some information about how to join the group, that's going to be coming on immediately following our lesson tonight. God bless you, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye. Just want to remind you about the D-Life journal that we're using. We're going to be using this for the next year as our church's daily Bible reading and our discipleship tools that we'll be using throughout our ministries. The journal is appearing on your screen. That's the book that we're going to be using. If you would like one, you can contact the church office. The number there is appearing on the screen. Talk to Pam. And if you would like to get a copy of the D-Life journal and use it, either in a discipleship group or your Sunday school class, or just for your personal daily Bible reading, or as a part of our Wednesday night virtual D-Life class, we'll be using this book to guide us week by week by week in our Bible studies. So if you would like one, contact the church office, and we'll be sure that you'll get one. We'll hope to see you soon. Talk to you later.